Hi everyone, it's Tina from Soper Yarn. We're going to talk today about gauge and why gauge matters. So the pattern, every pattern should have some sort of gauge number. So in this little book, this little remix book I've got, the patterns say the yarn, and then there's always a section for gauge. Any pattern worth its salt will give you the math. So this is based on 14 stitches to 4 inches in the pattern. So if you think about, stitches per so many inches and you want so many inches, you can do that math and it will work out. You think, well, it's a shawl and all those things don't matter. But if that shawl, if you're getting a bigger gauge and you have to knit every stitch on that shawl to make it work, then, and yours is bigger, you're going to run out of yarn. And that runs into trouble all the time, because if you have to knit every row and every stitch, then you will run out of yarn if you knit too big. So it works for everything, not just hats and mitts and all those things. The reason why this gauge issue came up is that twice this week we've had an issue with a hat. So this is Regan's hat. It's the moose hat from the Saltwater Mittens book. She's knit it to gauge. It fits a good hat. It fits my head, which is a very large hat. And then we have Shelley's. Same hat. Same needles. Different hands, different person. So Shelley clearly knits tighter. Not wrong, just tighter. She's done a beautiful work with the color work. She's done a really nice job with the inside. Look at those floats done there. But they're not puckered. So there's nothing wrong with this hat other than the math is off and it's too tight. So we sent Shelley home with the request to do a swatch, and their first response was, "Oh, I don't like doing swatches. They take so much time." But so does knitting another hat. So if you want it right the first time, take a few minutes and do a swatch. So this pattern, in this book, said 14 stitches to 4 inches. So when I cast on to do my little swatch with this little ball of yarn, I am going to cast on 28 stitches, 30 stitches, twice the number that's required. Don't just cast on 14 stitches and think that's going to work, because if you cast on 14 stitches, it's going to squish and it's going to roll, and it won't give you an accurate representation of what that inside of that sweater is going to be. So you cast on double, and then you do whatever the stitches that they say for the gauge. So most of them are stocking stitches. So knit 1 row, purl 1 row, and do that. You can create a nice little edge around the outside, but do that, and do that for 6 inches. So you have got a nice 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter square, 4 inches by 4 inches. I speak both languages, duolingual here. So cast on the stitches, knit your square. If you're kind of unsure and you think, I kind of would, knit a square in 1 needle size. Go up or down with the next one. Do another square. Put some garter stitch in the middle. So a square should look sort of like this. Nice equal square. And then you can lay it down and you can count the stitches. This is also a nice little swatch, but it's in garter stitch. And garter stitch will read differently. There will be more rows because garter stitch is squishy and they're squished together a bit more. So do what the pattern requests for gauge. So I'm going to knit a swatch, and maybe I'll do a couple so we can measure, and I'll get back to you tomorrow and we'll do... Hi everyone, we're back, and I finished knitting the swatch last night, and there wasn't enough in the yarn to do another swatch. So I did start a little bit with a smaller needle, and you can see how I've done a couple of rows of garter stitch here, and then I'm going to do the next size. So I dropped the needle size a whole size down because truthfully it was the needle in front of me. So but this is how I measure, and you can buy a fancy thing that's a square that will, block off your 4-inch square, and then you can count your stitches. But I find sometimes it's easier to be able to pull it apart so then you can count them easier. So I just put a needle somewhere in a nice straight line, and then I measure my 4 inches. So I've got my 4 inches here, and I've marked these 2 spots. So then I can move the swatch and I don't have to worry about whether I'm going to get it in line or not. And I'm going to count. So I'm going to count these stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So I'm getting 15 and I should only have 14, which means I have a choice. I could double check this after I've washed and blocked it, which I think it will do because I find this to be a bit loose. So going up to make it 14 might be too loose, and there's quite a bit of stretch. So if this is a sweater, I'd rather it be a touch small than too big, because you can always stretch a little bigger, but you can't squish to make it smaller. So I think for this, the 6mm would work. And you will get to know how to measure and what works for you. And I was surprised by this because when I knit with cotton, I find because there's no spring in this, I knit looser, and I usually end up having to drop a needle size when I knit with cotton. But clear with this yarn, I'm pretty much on. Because I think if we stretch this a little bit, blocked it properly, laid it down, I will get 14 stitches to 4 inches. So, but if I go up here and I kind of sneak that, so see those 2 stitches in there, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 14, 16. So that's going to make it 16. So that's way too small, and that's just fudging those needles. Now you don't want to do this on a normal basis because that's not very accurate, because it was going from 15 and it might actually turn out to be more like 18. So, you know, I could always try another swatch and go down to the 5.5 and do that, and then soak this completely wet, make sure all the fibers get completely wet, and then roll it in a towel, squish up most of the water, lay it flat, and then let it dry, and then count it again. Yarn sometimes blooms, and you know, those threads, those bases open up. Being in the manufacturing system adds a bit of squishiness to it, and once it gets wet again, it will open up. So that's that bit about gauge. I hope this helps. It will save you a lot of time in the long run, and eventually you'll get to know what your size is and how you knit, and you might change after a while too. Your mood will change, your where you're, you know, what kind of yarn you're using and how big your needle is. I know when I knit with a big needle, I tend to knit really loose because those stitches are bigger, it's more awkward, and my hands aren't happy there. So it is worth doing a swatch when you're not sure, and learn where your hands and what your needles like to knit at. It's important. It will save you a lot of time in the long run. And if nothing else, you know, got a nice little pocket here you can put on the inside of your work, and use your swatch as a pocket. So I hope that helps. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great month. Bye. Hey, part 3. Takes 3 days to do this. This is more about gauge and math and all those things that we rely on when we're trying to figure out what yarn to use for a pattern. And some companies, particularly those from the States, and I think the States are the only ones that you actually use the numbering system, will suggest a yarn that's, say, a number 4 or a number 3 or number 2, and then so you go looking for them, and it's a really good guide, but there are ranges within that. So it's like a 1.2 and a 2.9, you know, it's kind of that math. So sometimes they suggest a 4, but they want a lightweight 4 and not a heavier weight 4. So we have to be careful with those. Like this, for instance, is classified as a 1. So it's very fine. It's sock yarn. And this one is also classified. This one is classified as a 2. And it's just as fine. The thing is, this is like 1.9 and this is like 2.1. So they're both very thin. They would probably work for a pattern, not together, but they would work for the same pattern, you know, for sock or shawl or something like that. So these would work together, but one's a 1 and one's a 2. So it's more about what the label tells you. So that I can show you, this is a 3, and 3 is kind of double knitting weight. This is a 3, it's quite a fine 3, so it would be like a 3.1, and then we can have something that's heavier. So this is more sport weight, not DK, certainly not worsted. So we have to be careful with those. A really good example of that is this one. So this is Barocco's hand-painted altar wool, and lovely yarn. Nice, consistent, good 18 to 20 stitches, 24 stitches to 4 inches. Nice yarn. Then we have this other lovely yarn. It's also ladleable to 4, but look at how thick that is. There's no way you could use a pattern that calls for this and put this thing in it, because it would be too heavy and too dense. The math would not work for that. And then we get into the thick and thin yarns, and this one's labeled a 4, but really the parts of it are 4, parts of them are almost a 6. So they too will knit differently. But we've used this for worsted weight, so it works well for that. And then we have 5, which is chunky. And this is a nice standard chunky. What I do like about Barocco yarns, they are specific yarns with specific gauges. And this is what you look for. You look for something that, if you have this pattern and you want yarn and you want to find a pattern, look for something that's 14 stitches to 4 inches, and your garment will be bang on and knit nice and stay nice. So look for those things. So don't rely on just because it says it's a 4 that it's going to be a 4. It's actually, you have to look at the math on the label before you take that into consideration. Some of the yarn is designed and by those that don't knit, but they know a lot about yarn, and they have a gauge that they use that are meters per 100 grams, and that's what they use to suggest their gauge. But we all know that a ton of steel and a ton of feathers look like two very different things. So take those into considerations when you're doing your swatch or trying to find a pattern. This is what your local yarn shop will do for you, is that, we have the experience behind what you can do and how you can, what yarns to use and how you can have success with your project. So math is important, getting gauge is important, and doing all those things will give you a successful project that will fit. And if that's always been a problem for you, then those are the things you need to look at first. There are no knitting police. How you knit is how you knit. If you have to go down 3 sizes in needles to get the right size, if you have to go up 2 sizes, nothing wrong with that. There are some designers that when I look at their patterns, I automatically go up a couple of sizes because I know they must knit very loosely and their needle sizes are too small for what I would use. And that's just the way it is. And I hope this has helped a little bit, help you understand a little bit about yarn and how it performs. And I'm also one of those is buy the best you can afford. So if you're looking for a project, go finer. It'll take you longer to knit, but you can use a better quality yarn and you'll come out with a nicer project in the long run. Well, have a great month. We'll talk to you next month about something less math. Thanks so much. Bye for now.